We are here with Jan Blanco to do a breakdown of SpongeBob SquarePants.
A crew like you comes along maybe once in a lifetime.
Hello, Laura. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. So we're here to do a breakdown of your SpongeBob character. This started for me as a practical joke. Like, if I get enough likes on a particular video, I will do a SpongeBob breakdown at some point, and that had spectacularly backfired because people were like, "Oh, that sounds nice." I'm glad that you are here, Jan, to help me out of this sticky situation that I have put myself. I'll leave the floor to you to present the character. And perhaps you can tell us just a little bit about where your idea came from to work on this particular character. What are the kind of work that you like to do? Because this SpongeBob character is very similar to your other characters in the sense that you like to do those very disgusting kind of highly detailed versions of characters that already exist there. So perhaps you can also talk a little bit about your interest in doing these kind of characters.
So the first thing, regarding the look of my characters, like mostly of them are depressed or smoking cigarettes. Some people like to do cute characters to bring joy to people's day. I don't do that kind of work, so sorry about that. This style, it's a consequence of my professional work.
You find your own work depressing? Is that...
Not really, but the thing is, when I started working 3D, I started working with advertising. I saw myself doing always cute characters for everyone. And then that was kind of... I have like my spare time to create my stuff. So I think it was natural to do something that is the opposite of my professional work.
Time for the artiste to go to work.
I heard a friend of mine saying, "Oh, I like your work. I see like the characters are tired because they are always being used for advertising, for remakes and remasters. So it's funny to see like how different people see something specific from my work." So anyway, let's start to take a look on the main project here. So I worked mainly with two images. The first one is SpongeBob, Gary, watching TV. I found myself in similar situations when I was working a lot and living by myself back in Brazil. I did Gary on my YouTube live streams. I do live streaming on my YouTube channel every Thursday. You can search for Jan Blanco. I also share stuff on my Instagram and Twitter. One important thing to keep in mind is that my live streaming videos are mostly in Brazilian Portuguese, but I always answer English or Spanish questions on the chat. And him at work, I was inspired by the Fight Club shot when the main character talks about the repetition of the routine. Like everything is a copy of a copy of a copy. The idea was, okay, SpongeBob works with something that he loves.
Why, that's the most diabolical Krabby Patty ever spawned.
But after 20 years, 30 years working doing the same thing, it's natural to see the love that you have with something to end, you know? It's a kind of depressing idea, but I usually like to make some turntables of the characters. So I did this one. I like to do that to show how the character is looking on different angles. I love to make close-up renders of my work. I want people to see all that tiny details because it was a lot of work. So here we can see like the peeling skin effect that I will show soon.
So cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the different softwares that you have used to create SpongeBob?
Well, I started, to be honest, on paper. So I did this sketch when I was without my computer. When I moved to Canada, I was working with a temporary computer. So I was sketching more. And I did this SpongeBob illustration. And then I started to sculpt SpongeBob with Zbrush. And then the textures were painted on Substance Painter. And the final render with the grooming, the shaders, the lighting, every final detail was made inside Blender. That includes also all the displacement details from the sponge that we'll share very soon. So this kind of sponge effect is a mix of procedural noise in Blender and hand sculpt inside Zbrush. So during the process, I started to think which part of the project would be made inside Zbrush, inside Blender, inside Substance Painters.
This is super cool because Blender is often regarded as a software that cannot be used in a professional setting. And yet you do these amazingly detailed characters. And that is your go-to software. I'm sure you use other things as well, of course, and we know that Blender isn't perfect. It does have weaknesses, especially on the texturing side. But you use Blender extensively professionally, right?
My first contact with 3D was with Blender. In the beginning of 2020, I moved to Canada with my wife and started to work at Tangent Animation as a senior surfacing artist, mostly on the characters. Back at Tangent, we worked with Blender for Maya 3. So we also worked with Substance Painter and Zbrush, but the final render, lighting was all inside Blender. Grooming inside Blender as well. I'm happy to see that more and more studios are working with Blender for big productions. So it's amazing. I remember when I started to learn 3D, and it was common to hear from some friends like, oh, you like 3D, but you need to learn Maya or 3D Max or softwares like that. And it was like harder and slower and like, oh, do I really need to learn these softwares right now? So I choose to focus on my portfolio, push my limits with Blender.
People get scared that somehow, like, if Blender is all that they know, that somehow they won't be hireable. But you know, like when you look at, like, you are someone who uses Blender on a regular basis. I know that you use other softwares too, of course, but clearly you use a lot of Blender, and a lot of your portfolio seems to be based off of Blender, and yet you don't seem to have a hard time getting jobs. And you know, like, for me, the reason is very simple. Like, your characters are really kick-ass. You know, like, your work looks really, really good. You know, and so it's like when we look at your portfolio, your characters are really amazing, and it's like it doesn't matter which software you've used to create those. Like, what matters is the quality of the work that you are outputting. And I think that you are living proof, and your portfolio is a proof of that. You know, it's like less focus on software, more focus on quality. You know,
on my experience, it was a good thing to like focus on my work and my artistic eye, and keep softwares on a like second priority, something like that.
Cool. Yeah. So okay, SpongeBob then. A lot of those details are procedurally generated in Blender.
Yeah.
I think it would be very, very cool to see what has been sculpted within Zbrush. And then let's also see what is generated within Blender through procedural textures.
I usually keep Blender sculpting tools for the big picture stuff. So like to fix some posing stuff or silhouette, or during the blocking of my characters, I like to start with Blender because I can control the main shapes like spheres, cubes inside that, and then I export for Zbrush.
I really like this particular approach personally. You know, for me, Blender's strengths when it comes to sculpting are the 3D camera, the lighting. I feel as if I personally have a more accurate impression of the volumes that I am sculpting when I am working within Blender because of these things. So, but then again, Blender is not strong when it comes to detailing necessarily. ZBrush's weaknesses are Blender's strengths and vice versa. Like, for me, it makes complete sense to say, create a block out of the character using Blender so you can really take advantage of the 3D camera, the lighting, these sorts of things. Afterward, throw it over to ZBrush for detailing, because then you can really take advantage of ZBrush's strengths. And then afterward, once you're done with that, throw it back to Blender for the rendering, and you can still use Blender's tools, Blender's sculpting tools if there's any kind of shape adjustments that you need to do, you know? For me, like that's really like a workflow that really uses the best of every software that we have.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like Blender, it's faster for me to start blocking the character. Zbrush is faster for me to sculpting, working with Dynamesh. In Zbrush, I decided to keep this amount of details. If I started to sculpt the tiny holes for the sponge, that would be very confusing to work inside Zbrush, because for me, that kind of detail would be better to do with a different material layer. So with that, I could have more control of how big the details would be, the intensity. So I kind of did a plan in my head, like, okay, I will have like the character like this in ZBrush, and the final details will be like displacement with noise and some masks to preserve the face of the characters. And yeah, after that, I started to paint the textures in Substance Painter. So inside Painter, I usually import my normal map from ZBrush. So from ZBrush, I export my displacement and normal map. However, I don't use my normal map for render. I use my normal map to bake my curvature and ambient occlusion in Painter. So that gives me interesting curvature paths, even if I don't have it high density geometry. So you can see there's a lot of information here, and then I start to work on my textures. So base color, and then applying different values on specific areas like the eyelids, and then some noise with different values. So just some grunge textures to have variation. And then, okay, is there a name for that? Like spots?
Liver spots.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. A few layers for some veins. Sponge usually don't have veins, but it's funny to play around with that kind of idea. Like,
now I'm gonna starve.
It's so disgusting. It's so good. Yeah.
yeah, I usually get inspired by the popular close-ups from the show. They use it to call that gross up shots.
Still have all my baby teeth and look at me!
I like to play with that because it's funny to see like a sponge, but at the same time it has veins or bumps or organic details.
Oh, you look terrible, SpongeBob.
I also included a few more details, color details, like a more darker color for the eyelids. And something interesting to keep in mind is that during this pass, I am also exporting to Blender to make renders and check every time. So I don't do everything here and then, okay, it's done, let's finish. No, I can also show a little bit of the folder, the render that I did. Yeah, it started like this. It's not the best character, but it takes time to improve the model. So I usually make a lot of renders and test the displacement, details, shapes. This probably is the first pass of textures, and this is like the first pass for expression. Testing composition as well. So even if the model is not finished, I like to play with ideas for the final render. So his expression, pose, the camera angle, the lights, every single part. I like to keep in mind that my process is not linear, so I am always making renders, even if I am still sculpting the character. So it's always, like I said before, I like a conversation between all the softwares, and then checking details, checking lights, and having fun. Also checking where can I put his cigarette. And Yeah, here we have like some tests with displacement. I will show the displacement setup. I like to use the curvature pass as an overlay blend mode on top of everything. So
Yeah.
this is usually
Very, very small amount, right? That's 10% opacity, right?
yeah. Right now it's very subtle. That helps me to increase a little bit more the details. Probably I have more of that on top of together. So a dust pass and more information for the color. We have more of the curvature here, but right now it's like a multiply pass with a dark color. The beard is nothing complex, just a gradient with some color and a few spots. And on top of that, I also apply a particle system inside Blender to make the little strands of beard. I just realized it now that he has a bump inside his eye socket.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
And then on top of this, we have the Zbrush displacement. And on top of that, it's the look for the sponge. So
that's the magic.
That is a crazy. I will try to show the notes, but I have no idea how I did that. It's everything like procedural noise and a mix between positive noise. So we have like some parts going to outside the model and negative noise. So we can see some holes here on the character, mainly on the hand, for example. When I decided to play with the noise displacement, it was easier to control that inside Blender because I just have a scale parameter to work, and then I can test different sizes and densities possible to work inside ZBrush, but it would be way harder for me. So painting with brushes and exporting and making updates, it would be like a nightmare. So I like to keep, like you said before, to use the best of each software inside my workflow. After the sponge displacement, we have some grooming. So the grooming is not a big deal for this character, mostly noise and size variation. We can see like eyelashes, eyebrows, the beard as well, and the fabric. The fabric I like to put some particle system for the fabric. It looks cool, and a little bit here on the tip of the nose as well because it's gross, so it works good. The last pass for the look depth, it's the peeling effect. So we'll show that as well, but let's compare with and without the peeling effect. So the peeling is like a second mesh on top of the character.
It's a second mesh on top, yeah.
Yeah, on top of the character, we have this peeling skin. It's like a second mesh with procedural noise. And now we have like the peeling effect without the shader, so we can see what is happening. There is no complex mask for the peeling because when we see everything in context, the blend gets very subtle.
It blends really well. Yeah.
This is the peeling mesh. So I use the mask modifier just to control where I wanted this effect. And here, for example, it was like a easier way to work with that. Peeling skin, how that works. We have like the noise texture. Even if I don't have any UVs, I can use like object coordinate, and then it will work fine. I just need to keep scale and detail in mind. So yeah, there is no secret for the scale and detail. I just try to keep something that looks interesting in my model. Comparing the effect in context with the final character, it's very important. So after having more contrast on this effect, I have here a blend with the texture paint, because the texture paint is the way that I will use. Also with the modifier mask, the vertex paint is the way that I found to control where I want more or less effect with that. So controlling this effect, it's also important to avoid too much detail on the character, and that can make it look a bit strange. So it just multiply node RGB, mix RGB, and the thing, the magic happens when we start to use like the transparent node with the rest. So for example, this guy here, it's the map for the displacement. So I use a very subtle value for the displacement. We can check here. Let me open a HDR. Something very important about the peeling effect and the peeling skin is that we need high subdivisions to work, because that it's like 100% displacement. So without polygons, we don't have a good effect. So we have like this effect with the displacement. On top of that, we will mask like the more positive parts of this mesh. We have the displacement happening like that in the mesh with a noise, and we will use the same noise to make a mask just on top of these guys. So with that in mind,
you're making those disappear. Yeah, so you're masking out the based on the levels essentially.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah.
So the result will be like that. This is what I want. So we have this noise for the displacement, and on top of that we have another color ramp to mask the top of the noise. We mix that with a transparent and a different shader. So let's check first with the diffuse shader and see what we have. So this is the look. It also looks like a ash in a way, something like that. I also applied that on my Stimpy model. For Sking, I like to control sometimes where I put. Okay, we have like here. So it looks a little
peeling skin again.
Yeah, a little bit more natural. Some people work the same effect just in Substance Painter using anchor points and a few layers, but I like sometimes to push more, even if that makes my render slower. I like to have like this more natural look for the peeling skin. For characters, I like to make like close-up renders, and I like how the silhouette looks more natural with that peeling effect. So we don't see like a clean line in the silhouette. We see like noise and peeling skin and hair. So that kind of detail, I like to spend more time working on that. Even if that makes my render slower, I think it helps to achieve a more realistic result. The main difference here is only the peeling skin and the grooming, and that makes a huge difference.
Since we saw the whole workflow related to the peeling skin, could we also see that workflow in relation to the displacement? But we can go over it a little bit faster because we've already seen some of that. After that, perhaps you can take a little bit of time to talk about the grooming.
Let's take a look into the sponge displacement material. So I would say that noise texture is like my main texture for 3D art. I use noise texture for almost everything.
I love procedural 3D noises too. They are amazing.
It's amazing. I love noise texture. Yeah, what I decided to do here was I have my displacement from Zbrush, and on top of that, I made a few maps for the sponge displacement. So that means a few noise textures, but also Voronoi. The Voronoi was helpful for the more circular spots on the displacement, and the noise texture was better for the more irregular shapes for the displays. So we can see like there is a lot of things happening here. Let me try to switch to the material preview. Okay. So yeah, the tricky part was to blend everyone. So I just played with a few nodes. So we have like math node here, and I was just connecting stuff and changing the blending mode. And yeah, it was a nightmare, but it worked at the end. So if I change the size of my noise here, so we have the raw noise texture. If I change the size here, yeah, there you go. So we see in real time the size of the noise changing. That is very, very helpful when I am working with look dev, because I don't have a specific target in my mind. I sometimes test, do renders, double check stuff, and when I see something nice, I keep that way. So this is why I like to control some stuff inside Blender nodes rather than sculpting by hand every single spot in Zbrush.
It's a very smart way to work, and of course, like, you are saving time because your noise is like, you don't have to place every little spot, right? So you can just it's a very smart way to work. Like, I also personally love to use noises, blend noises together, because it gives you great results if the blending is good, of course. It's fast to do. It gives you very sharp details, and you can have these at any resolution that you want. So you have to work. You're not bound by the resolutions of your textures either. You know, like, it's a fantastic way to work.
Yeah, this is why I love to use noise, because when I do my close-up renders, it's easier to have like detailed parts, because the procedural maps will have like infinite resolution, you know. So that helps me to achieve a more detailed character and material as well.
Can you tell us now a little bit about grooming and what's going on there?
So for the grooming part with SpongeBob, I did some eyelashes and beard. So let's take a look into the beard particle system. So for this kind of hair, I usually don't need to use the particle brushes, because I am not combing any specific guides. Maybe for the eyebrows, I did that. I put some strands to have a better control, but for the small grooming parts, I just work with the emission parameters. I also work with vertex groups. So I create groups for density and length of my grooming. So I use a few brushes here in the vertex groups to paint where I want more or less particle system. After that, I use that as a mask inside the particle system settings, either for density or length or both. And inside the parameters, I also play with a few values for the noise and also for the length. So let's take a look. I like to work with the timing. Allows me to control like variation for the length. This is the standard parameter, I believe. So when I decrease the end and I increase the random, I start to have a more natural look into that. And I usually do this trick for almost every grooming task of my characters, so it helps to look more natural. I like to use that more than the length here, because here we have just like 1 and 0 values when we use the parameters here. But here in the timing, I feel it's more natural the way it looks. So it's a personal choice. I'm not sure it makes a huge difference. But on top of that, I work with the roughness values. So nothing is specific here. I just go moving the sliders until I have something that I like. And I just avoid to make everything to look exactly the same. So variation, it's very interesting to have with grooming. And for that, the best slider is the threshold. Threshold, thank you. So with the standard particle system from Blender, I managed to create all the grooming that I needed for this character. So playing with vertex paint as masks and variation on the length and roughness was enough for me to find a cool result with the character. And grooming was used almost everywhere. So fabric with grooming looks amazing. So I always put fabric. Almost everything has grooming.
Jan, thank you so much. I guess we're looking to wrap this up. Is there anything else interesting that you would like to mention?
It takes a lot of time to finish personal work. So sometimes it's good to have like patience and don't overload yourself, because I found myself in the past trying to make more complex artworks, and it was very frustrating to not finish them. So sometimes we just forgot to be more honest with ourselves. So the thing is, it takes time and it takes patience. It takes a lot of crashes and corrupted files, and 3D art, it's almost most of the time just trying to find what is wrong and fixing bugs, and it's crazy. But take your time and don't try to rush things. Art takes time, and it can be dangerous for ourselves to be very hard with us, to work faster. Oh, I need to work. I need to make 10 projects on my portfolio. I need to work every single minute of my day. And sometimes that doesn't help at all. So yeah, just enjoy the journey.
Enjoy the journey. Yeah. It's going to be a long one. So you better make sure that you do things that you enjoy, and that you work on characters that you enjoy to work on. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you again. It was amazing to share some of my stuff, and thank you.